I'm going to introduce Walter Menapace. He's a postdoc, Marie Curie postdoc in our group, the Barcelona Center for Subsurface Imaging. Walter, he finished his PhD at Marum in Bremen, I think, in 2017, and he's been studying mud volcanism and seismicity. He's been chief scientist in 2 surveys, and he's been also interested in subduction zones and the relation with mud volcanism and fluids. And today he's going to be talking about this, mud volcanism, fluid flow, and seismicity. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Manel, for the introduction, and thanks for having me here on this Friday talk. Today is going to be basically some of the the newest results on actually a span of relatively recent cruises we have, both Marum and the ICM in the Gulf of Cadiz. First, since the public is quite different, I would like to have an introduction on the mud volcanoes and mud volcanism itself. As you can imagine, this is quite a widespread process, both on the seafloor, as you can see, as on land, whereas most of the mud volcanoes are in fact concentrated in subduction zone, or better said, compressional tectonic settings. The rest of the mud volcanoes itself is actually distributed where sediment compaction or hydrocarbon reservoirs are present. Specifically, I just want to introduce a little bit of history of mud volcano for the non-specialists. Here you can see myself in Azerbaijan, the land where most mud volcanoes are present on Earth, and where actually mud volcano has been firstly identified. Historically, and I have here this depiction of fire, the Zoroastrian religion have been developed in Iran and Azerbaijan and around these surroundings. And one might believe that the reason for it is in fact mud volcanoes. So these features, sometimes since they expel gas and other volatile and inflammable substances, sometimes they self-ignite. And these holy fires are what in the past might have caused these religions and cults to spread. So mud volcanoes, we said, sedimentary structure, very similar structure-wise to magmatic volcanoes, but with basically classed sediments, water and gases expelled as ejecta. As you can see in this diagram here, most of the gases expelled from mud volcanoes are methane. Therefore, also this gas component, also very significant to the greenhouse effect. As you can see in this other diagram here below, actually 7% of, well, this is kind of outdated now, but nonetheless, 7% of all the natural sources, all the emission to the atmosphere are due to geologic emission, and most of those are actually mud volcano or seep related. Here a video of a recently discovered mud volcano in a cruise in the actually south of Svalbard. This was quite famous, and you can see here how all these 3 components of mud volcano ejecta are represented: gases, solids, in this case sediments, and then what you cannot see, but it's probably because in this turbulence, fluids also there. But nonetheless, mud volcanoes are also very interesting for life. So the geofuels that are expelled from mud volcanoes are indeed connected to several deep sea inhabitants. In this case, we have tube worms in the Athena mud volcano south of Turkey, which in a consortium with other microorganisms are indeed eating the methane gases expelled there. And then we have also several bacterial mats around methane seeps, and also vesicomedic clams, for example. So several signs of microorganisms and also macrobiota around mud volcanoes. These features are actually forming due to different processes, which might be shallow and might be deep, and they all basically add to some initial structural and tectonic features, basically pushing the exhumation of the solids and the fluids. But volcanoes, as anticipated, are very frequent also in subduction zones. Why? Well, basically because deep faults are present there, and also water-loaded sediment, which, due to which the compaction is actually fueling and contributing to the evolution of these features, which oftentimes, in fact, sits on anticlinal or deep-seated faults. Their life cycle is actually quite complex, and I want you to actually remind this picture here, where I will come back later. So mud volcano, after the main expulsion, where they build the cone, they actually, which is this peak phase, where most of the gas is actually emitted, they proceed into a slower, less gas emission phase, and then they shift to latent condition, where almost no gas is emitted and the feature is basically collapsing or self-sealing. Whereas after a certain period of recharge, the feature itself can be reactivated. And then I want to finish this short introduction, I want you to try to follow me in this geologic game. So these are three schematics of three holes dug in the earth for scientific purposes. The first two are on the ocean, and this one is on land. Probably, not being a marine geologist, you don't know the first two ones. These are the deepest hole dug during the ocean drilling program, 2,000 meters below seafloor. And keep in mind, this has been drilled in more than 5 or 6 expeditions on the ocean floor. Whereas this one is the deepest hole dug during the International Ocean Drilling Program, the successor of the ocean drilling program. Again, 3 kilometers below seafloor. This one, I think it might be common knowledge or not, maybe for a geologist. This is the deepest hole dug on Earth for scientific purposes. This is the Kola super deep borehole in the Kola Peninsula north of Finland, which reaches 12 kilometers depth. Now, why I'm showing you this? Well, because actually mud volcanoes in the same area so in the same Kumano Basin, are actually, due to different studies, are actually bringing to the seafloor products from up to 10 kilometers depth. So they are more efficient machine of transporting these deep products to the surface than what men until now did in the whole scientific ocean drilling progress. And same for the Gulf of Cadiz, where here we will deepen in this presentation, and I will explain you more about this. So now onto the real focus of this presentation. The Gulf of Cadiz is a complex, region where, well, basically the tectonic is due to the convergence of the Eurasian and the African plate, and the numerous transform faults present here are actually cross-cutting different structures. There are several different faults transform faults, thrust faults, etc., which are interesting in the whole region. But I would like you to focus mostly on the swim faults, which are going to be the focus of one of the study of this presentation. These are transform faults which are cross-cutting this whole structure here, which we're going to call the accretion, well, the sedimentary prism of the Gulf of Cadiz. And we're going to analyze in the further studies. What I want you to draw, where I want you to draw your attention next is also on earthquakes in the area. So it's well known that the Gulf of Cadiz is the source of the huge 1755 earthquake, the Great Lisbon earthquake, one of the biggest of recorded and instrumental history. And nonetheless, I would like to point you to this region here, actually the region of the accretionary prism that I highlighted before, or the sedimentary wedge that I highlighted before, because of the absence of seismicity in this, or the absence of high magnitude earthquake in the same area. And to finish on the introduction on the Gulf of Cadiz, I would like you also to focus on the mud volcanism. So there are different fields of mud volcano, we can say, distributed in this sedimentary wedge. And several of them are active, meaning they are actively expelling gases, sediments, and fluids. And nonetheless, they have different characteristics. So the mud volcanoes on the north here, on the basically on the Cadiz, so on the Spanish EEZ, they are more less active, and they are more actually colonized by different life forms, also due to the influence of the Mediterranean outflow water. Whereas the mud volcanoes here on the south, they're actually more active. They present, so they show different presence of gases in their sediments, and also they show the typical signatures, the typical polar water signatures of mud volcanism. Here on the lower part of the slide, you can see actually seismic section through the sedimentary wedge, and you can see that most of the mud volcanoes are located in the upper part. This is the upper wedge. There are two lobes of this wedge which are not identifiable here, but I will show them, I will point them out to you in the next slide, and also on the lower part of this sedimentary wedge. So the results I will present are actually parts of several studies we are conducting with data resulting from these three main expeditions, the M149, the M167, and the InSight expedition. These were three different expeditions led by Marum, the University of Bremen, and the ECM here. All happened between 2018 and 2020. The purpose of the expedition was actually various, but I will focus here more on the mud volcanoes and the fluid flow and the seismicity results. So most of the scientific questions I will focus on are basically related to the fluid flow in the accretionary prism and how it relates to the distribution of the various gas expelling features, in this case the mud volcanoes in the Gulf of Cadiz. What is the lesson from actually all the data that we collected, pore fluid, the bathymetry, the seismic data? What can we extrapolate about the geological processes in the Gulf of Cadiz? And we also had on board of this expedition a so-called seafloor drilling device, and this gave us also several long cores between 20 and 50 meters below seafloor. And these deep drill cores are also, one of the questions is what do they reveal about the activity, both of the mud volcano and the fault zone, and what are the sedimentary records, what did they register actually about the paleoseismicity and the seismic activity in the area. So first I would like to start with the fluid signatures in the mud volcanoes. So we took some mud volcanoes we sampled, the one here in the triangles, in the southern lobe. Now you can see them clearly of the sediment wedge, and also one in the southernmost part. These mud volcanoes actually, which are represented here, are what we studied mostly were the pore fluid. As you can see here, this is, let's say, our standard method on board for the sampling of pore fluid. For the ones not familiar with it, there are some syringes where we apply vacuum and we extract the pore contained in the sediment, the pore water contained in the sediment. And so our results show different effects, but mostly, so here I'm showing the major ions and some anions. And I want you to focus mostly on the chloride here and on the strontium. So in the pore water of mud volcanoes, we can see different effects due to the different sediment water reactions happening at depth. When we see the chlorinity going down, so the concentration going down, it's a sign that fresh water is entering the mud volcano system, in this case most probably from clay dehydration, and this contributes to this signature in the fluids. On the other hand, for example, a high strontium concentration in the fluids is actually telling us that there is another source in our fluid end members, which we will identify subsequently. So we can see that basically all the mud volcanoes here, when we are plotting Na versus Cl, and Cl here, and strontium versus Cl, they actually show an increasing effect of halide dissolution, and at the same time this contribution of the clay dehydration I was telling you about. But not all the mud volcanoes. So there is this outlier here, also grouping with different mud volcanoes sampled in the past, which is actually telling a different story. And we're going to see it again here in the lower left. It's this mud volcano here, basically in the southwesternmost part of the sedimentary wedge, which is actually overlying one of these swim faults, if you remember. And you see that we analyze the strontium isotopic contents of the fluid, and you see that it actually plots again. So it plots again here with these other mud volcanoes identified in the southernmost part of the Gulf of Cadiz, where the fluid origin had actually connected or been calculated to be the oceanic crusts. So in this case, whereas these mud volcanoes represent, let's say, a standard signal that we can find in the upper part of the accretionary or the sedimentary wedge of the Gulf of Cadiz, we can see that actually these mud volcanoes on the exterior part, which are sitting on top of the major transform faults, are actually showing a different signal, which is more linked to the presence of the oceanic crust at depth. So we actually decided to have a look at these lineaments, at the swim lineaments, and luckily we drilled 2 long cores in two of these pull-apart basins along the lineaments, in this case the lineament center, the southern and the northernmost branch. And these are the cores, the name GOB ones, and these are heat flow measurements that we took in their proximity. And looking at the cores, what we see here was actually quite puzzling, because the deep cores show actually a strong increase in salinity. If you see here, it's about 2,000, almost 3,000 millimole. So it's you can always track actually the pore water content with the dotted line throughout this whole graph, and so we were quite puzzled. Nonetheless, there were other mud volcanoes that also showed this increase in salinity sampled in the past, but actually had quite different characteristics, because not only the salinity was increasing, but also they had strong enrichment in boron in this case, and lithium, which are two elements reconductible to clay mineral dehydration. So not only, which is something that we did not see in our fault cores. So this not only puzzled us, but also pushed us to investigate further this fault cores, which with this enigmatic signature. And then we noticed that, sorry for the resolution of this figure, actually most of the fault cores, they represent, they plot in this plot, they basically represent pure dissolution of halides, whereas the mud volcanoes ones are mostly, as I mentioned, reconductible to other sediment mineral transformation, in this case clay dehydration. And also we had a look in the heat flow we actually measured through these pull-apart basins along the fault, and we saw that in the fault zone area this so our measurements were actually 3 times higher than background measurements. So we were actually quite suspicious, and we did some further analysis and modeling, and we deducted that basically our fault cores, which in this case are these ones here, they basically show no clay dehydration input or very low clay dehydration input, and thanks to a further strontium isotopic analysis, we actually managed, and modeling, we actually managed to reconduct the origin of this fluid to a small component, part of the origin of the fluid to a small component of continental crust. And in fact, our reconstruction is actually that the swim fault, this main swim fault that I was mentioning you about in the beginning, has different branches, and the different branches actually present different effects, but they are at the border between probably, or they definitely have, the pore water definitely have the influence of both continental and accretionary prism or sedimentary units contribution in its composition. And again, some of the mud volcanoes are actually connected to the fault, but some are actually independent, just let's say sourcing their ejecta in the accretionary prism unit themselves, but it's a complicated dynamics which reflects mostly the distribution of the faults. Nonetheless, if you remember one of the first slides, the low seismicity actually in the sedimentary wedge itself might be related to this fluid flow present in the faults, which actually weakens the rheology of the transform fault, thus favoring creep. This is also supported from previous literature, from different studies, where our, so the swim fault that we investigated with the different, in this case we are here, and in this case we are in this area, with the two deep cores, is actually at the boundary between continental and oceanic crust. So this was for us actually to have this validation also from other studies was with deep seismic study was quite important. And then again we decided actually we've seen also another puzzling signature in the geochemistry of the mud volcanoes. So the same feature, which are represented here on the top, we have these 4 mud volcanoes with different cores here, different sediment cores we took, some exemplary cores represented here, and this again, the chlorinity versus depth measure on these mud volcanoes. It can be better observed here, where we can see actually this puzzling feature. So we see on the right here in this lowermost plot the summit of. So these are the results of strontium isotope versus chlorinity, and as you see, they plot in two completely different fields, and you see that these results, so the pore fluids from the mud volcanoes expelled from the summit, are almost drinking water, whereas actually what at the same time is being expelled on the borders of the mud volcano, what we call the moat, this negative topographic feature around mud volcano, is actually salt water, extremely salt water. And so this was actually, again, quite puzzling. So this, as you understand by now, these are very complex features which not only variate spatially, but also in the same feature itself, there are different fluid pathways which sometimes are very puzzling. Nonetheless, we were lucky, or actually we were smart, because we have a seismic line on top of this feature, on this Ginsburg mud volcano and others, where I show you the geochemistry results before, and what we see is actually that this is the moat area, this depressed area around the mud volcano, and this is the summit one. What we see is that the fluid is actually not only, so the clay dehydration fluid, yes, is channeled in the summit of the mud volcano, so where everyone is actually always sampling and taking their course. But nonetheless, on the moat of the mud volcanoes, we see that there are quite bright reflectors, and the contact between the edifice itself and the surrounding sediment is actually acting as a pathway itself. So the fluid content of, so to say, the encasing sediment, which is in the Gulf of Cadiz salt rich, so because there are a lot of diapirs emerging through the different sedimentary units, is actually reflected in this seismic image. And of course, this contributes to a bigger question. So if actually the fluids were underestimated. So the fluid rates, the fluid emission from the mud volcano were underestimated. Just by looking at the summit, which normally how the estimations have been done. The contribution from the moat area, so the area around the mud volcano, is actually in the same order of magnitude, if not bigger. So this actually, the contribution at the same time, so in parallel of the gases to the greenhouse effect in mud volcanoes, in and around mud volcanoes, has to be recalculated, because in fact there is a component which is not basically taken into consideration in the literature, or very sparsely. And then I come to the last topic here for this talk, which is a final aspect we investigated in mud volcanism in the Gulf of Cadiz, which is mud volcanoes and their relation with seismicity. So from the literature, we know that mud volcano activity is actually related to seismic triggering. What you can see here is on the x-axis you have time, on the y-axis you have discharge, in this case gas discharge, and fresh mud flows on this other panel here on top. And red lines are earthquakes, which actually triggered gas emission and fluid flow. And you can see that not all, but most of the earthquakes in the area, in this area, which was an on-land mud volcano, actually triggered some sort of gas or mud discharge. At the same time, we can see that actually this triggering, you have here another study on mud volcanoes, on one mud volcano, which is highlighting earthquakes in a radius of 1,000 kilometers from the monitoring site, and which caused some sort of effect in the pore pressure of the sediment. And you can see at the same time that there is some threshold for earthquakes to create an effect, so a response in this case in the pore pressure of mud volcano sediment. And we can see it also in deep seismic images of various mud volcanoes worldwide, that actually the mud volcanoes are highly episodic features. So you can see this is so-called Christmas tree structure, which is where, basically the results of different eruptions in time of these peculiar mud volcanoes, which are subsequently being buried by sedimentation. And so the study is actually focuses on, again, the Ginsburg mud volcano. This is one of the most, of the biggest feature in the Gulf of Cadiz, therefore the oldest, one of the oldest, and therefore the most interesting for this kind of complex multidisciplinary studies. You can see here a map, an IUV map taken during one of the InSight crews. That's the background here. And thanks to this, we were managed actually to do targeted sampling of this, what you see here. So different flows being emitted from the mud volcanoes in different times. And as you can see, these flows have actually been dated. This is in false color an image of a core here on top of the mud volcano. And you can see that what we did was there is a hemipelagic sedimentation on top, then there is a mud flow, then again mixed with some sort of hemipelagic sedimentation, and then there is another episode of mud flow. So what we did was dating these interfaces wherever was possible, and these are the calibrated results from this dating. At the same time, we acknowledge, so I have to introduce also that there were other studies in the Gulf of Cadiz analyzing the paleoseismology of the area, most notably the Gracia et al. 2010 study, that you use different cores in the abyssal plains to actually highlight different earthquake trigger turbidites in these abyssal plains. So what we did was we used actually this study and the results from our study, and we see that actually some of the mud volcano events, some of the mud flows are actually triggered, may actually be triggered from this. So from the same events which actually triggered the turbidite deposition in the Gulf of Cadiz, so in the abyssal plains. But then again, there is a different recurrence time. And one of the explanation might be that, if you remember this figure I explained you in the beginning, might be that actually the mud volcanoes need some sort of recharge time. So the recurrence time of the mud flows is actually higher than the recurrence time for the turbidites, because one of the hypotheses is actually the mud volcanoes need this more time for the recharge in this area where maybe, or in the cases where maybe they are not so actively emitting, or they are in one of these quiescent phases. And then I wanted to show you a little bit. How am I with time? Yeah, okay. So a little bit of work that I'm actually also currently working on. We were so lucky that we actually in the core we drilled on the moat of this of the big mud volcano, the Ginsburg. We actually recovered something, for me, stunning. I never seen it in the thousands of different cores of mud volcanoes that I've seen. So there were these black stain sediment packages throughout the core, which later we learned are mostly composed of pyritized shells and pyritized forearm shells. These are macro remains. You can see like 1 centimeter scale, and also smaller ones, and autogenic mineral precipitates. And actually, I want to highlight again the position of this core, because it's on the side of the mud volcano, but outside of the actual edifice itself. At the same time, this high reflectivity path here is actually channeling fluids towards the position of this core, and in fact we believe that's what it was all about. So we analyzed the core with different techniques. In this case, you see this is the sum up of XRF scans and MSELs and also reflectivity data from the core. But of course, having a look at this, I mean, of course, if you know what you're looking at, you can see some pattern, but we needed a more focused approach. So we used actually, we did a clustering analysis with a principal component analysis, and later we found out that actually some of the most prominent, in this case, barium spikes that we scanned with our XRF machines were actually related to this black occurrence in the sediment, to this black colored sediment, and so mostly were composed of barium and sulfur. And this is actually something quite common, or something that is known in mud volcanoes themselves, or in areas where methane seepage is very present. Because if you can have a look at this literature scheme here, actually the sulfate, so this is called the sulfate methane transition zone. In this case, the sulfate coming from water, which is consumed by the methanogenic bacteria, actually precipitate at the same time autogenic barite. And this, we believe, is actually what these barium spikes represent and stand for. And so we actually took this core and we analyzed the delta 18O of the planktonic forams in the core, and we actually came up with this plot where so if you can look at this, these are the same barium spikes we were I was highlighting before, and if you can follow them to mostly through the different marine isotopic stage, you can see that the most prominent ones are actually mostly connected to low stand periods. So basically, yes. So there is not only this, but also where the sea level is dropping in the period where sea level is dropping, we also see this, let's say, the presence of the prominence of these different spikes, different barium precipitations. So basically, this, which is what I actually am working on now, there is the possibility here to reconstruct the seepage from this mud volcano throughout time. In this case, in the last 450,000 years, and thus actually connecting it to the different factors influencing the basically methane emission, and also connect it again to the global methane budget. So in conclusion, actually, what I would like you to take home from this talk is basically that mud volcanoes are sometimes rapidly changing, but sometimes are actually really low-lying, chill features. So, but on the other hand, they are really long-living. So, and then again, the ejecta from these structures can be used to multiple purposes, actually, but they highlight how, what kind of processes actually happen in subduction zones. And as I mentioned you in the beginning, one of, in my opinion, their best quality is to provide basically a free exploration, chaotic well inside tectonically active region. So in some, deciphering their evolutionary history is actually necessary, or it's a precious tool in order to basically solve or to improve our understanding of the subduction zone cycles. And I want to thank also all these contributors. This is, of course, not only my work, and all actually the expeditions participants, etc. Thanks for the attention.
Thanks for your talk, Walter. You went very fast about the sampling on the course, and you show this image with the syringes, and I couldn't understand. There were a lot of syringes.
Sorry?
Syringes?
Ah, syringes, yes,
yeah.
yes. Definitely.
And you said that they were used for sampling, and I couldn't
yes.
follow the logic.
Yeah. So basically, this is the system we are using to sample pore water in the sediments. Is a syringe which is connected to a tube, which is connected to a porous filter. It's called the Rhizome sampler, and these porous filters actually with the syringe you create vacuum, you create suction, and the filter actually extract the water from the sediment.
And you do that at different levels of the core?
Exactly. So you do it regularly spacing, or when you think there is an interesting feature which can have an influx in the pore water, and then you use it to sample.
Okay. And how long are these cores? How deep?
So the normal gravity cores up to 5 meters, 5 meters length, and the MIBO cores up to 40 meters length. So this is actually the method we are using normally, but there is also another method which squeezes actually the sediments to extrapolate the pore water, which is, it depends. The pro of this is that, of course, by not squeezing, you're not applying pressure to the sediment, so you cannot maybe release other elements in the water which can maybe contaminate your sampling.
Walter, very interesting talk. Thank you very much. I'm interested in trying to understand the relationship between mud volcanism, episodic mud volcanism, and the earthquake cycle. And you mentioned that fluid flow actually weakens the sediment, but mud volcanoes actually release pore pressure from deep, I guess. And in my view, that would actually strengthen the sediment. So,
but yeah, sorry, you had another part of the question?
no, that was basically trying to kind of a paradox to me,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah. No, I mostly.
I mean, I'm thinking of more Coulomb, for example, where you have part of the effective stress where you have pore pressure that acts to release the effective stress, basically.
Yeah, I mostly, when I was talking about basically the effect on the fluids on the fault was mostly that it basically can actually weaken, so it can produce this, for example, as you can see in different, so the high pressure at depth, so the presence of fluid can actually weaken the fault and fluidify it. So at least, so make it that's not rupturing as stick slip, so but it's creeping, basically.
Just trying to think whether actually fluid expulsion takes place during earthquake, before, after, or what is the actual match between earthquakes and mud volcanism episodes? You know, where are they? What is the actual relationship, and whether your dating can actually tell in which phase of the earthquake cycle your fluid expulsion event is actually located?
No, that's a very good question. I mean, also because in this relation, right? So let's say so my holy grail or of monitoring mud volcanoes is to find earthquake precursors, right? So one of these other let's say line of investigation we're developing is monitoring this feature in order to see if we can see some sort of variation in the pore pressure which can actually be related as a precursor of an earthquake. In this case, as you can see, as I showed you in this let's say recent data from the recent seismicity in different other areas, it looks like that's almost, at least the effect on pore pressure is instantaneous from earthquake and pore pressure monitoring in mud volcanoes, but from other studies they actually link the trigger eruption even days after when the earthquake actually happened. So it's still unclear, this kind of relationship, I think.
Okay, I have a question. It's related to the mode, this feature that you were showing. It looks like in some of the mud volcanoes, it's not so subdued as in some others. So I was wondering what's the difference and what controls that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Manuel. Well, it's mostly, I guess, first is the dimension of the feature, for sure. So a bigger, heavier feature is actually not only pressing down the sediment, but it also means that actually its reservoir is more depleted if it's like a rather shallow one. And again, if you see that it's an active gas expulsion feature, then all this gas expulsion also leads to subsidence, right? So collapse. And so the bigger features have indeed a pronounced mode, but also some of the smaller, more active ones. So it depends. Basically, it relates a little bit to the sediment around, to how the edifice itself evolves on the surrounding seafloor, and to how the reservoir reacts to the depletion.
I was thinking about this, about the relation between sedimentation rate and how fast this volcano is growing. No, so because this Christmas tree feature that you were showing, it doesn't have this mode thing. So I was kind of thinking. Thank you. Anybody else have a question? No. ¿Ya han preguntado online? No. Okay. So I think we are going to thank again Walter for the talk, and we're going to finish here.